Hey everyone, it's Chris Carter here on the North Shore Drive podcast. We've got Ray Fittipaldo on the Wednesday edition of the show. We're in Latrobe. Well, not yet on camera, but we are Wednesday morning, if you're checking this out, about to interview Steelers as they find their way into Saint Vincent College. We're going to go over some of the biggest questions heading into camp, including position battles, all here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm Chris Carter. He's Ray Fittipaldo. We're your Steelers beat writers. And as always, you can find us here on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. As always, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates, who also do workers' compensation when you've been hurt on the job. Who decides when you're better? Who decides when your treatment's over? And who decides when your benefits are over? The answer might surprise you. It's the insurance company's doctors. How does that make you feel? Well, if the answer is not great, you can call Edgar Snyder Associates today at 1-800-94-EDGAR. They'll fight for the workers' compensation rights you deserve. And remember, there's never fee unless they get money for you. Ray, I'm back, man. It's camp time. You're back. We're all back. It's full time, ready to go. We're excited to get things back going. We've been stopped making up topics in the dead of summer when there's nothing going on. Although the Steelers did give us a bit of a few things to talk about with Watt's contract and trades and all those things. But Ray, one group in particular, everyone's going to be paying attention to Aaron Rodgers, but the player that we haven't talked to who's going to be the biggest new addition to the team is Jalen Ramsey and this corner and who's going to come into this cornerback room that already has a new face in Darius Slay and a young face in Joey Porter Jr. I'm interested to see what Jalen Ramsey says when he shows up today, because the Steelers are looking to improve in different ways, and Jalen Ramsey, I think, is a big part of their plans for how they want to change things on defense.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that as well, Chris. You know, the Steelers really like his versatility. They think they're going to be able to use him all over the secondary, but we haven't talked to Jaylen yet. And maybe there's a position where Jaylen's going to be more comfortable. I'm sure he's going to say, hey, wherever the coaches need me, that's where I'm going to play. But, this is a guy who has played outside corner for most of his career. He's dabbled a little bit in the slot and maybe a few snaps here and there at free safety, but not a whole heck of a lot. So I think the Steelers really have plans to use him at all three. So this camp is going to be really interesting to see how that unfolds.
I think it is going to be really interesting because when you look at Jalen Ramsey, he has played very, very versatile experience in at the quarterback position. He's played left outside, right outside. In fact, last year he played outside cornerback, left and right. Only one snap differential between the two of them. There was one snap more, I think, on the right than the left. And he also played in the slot. Now, not as much as he played in the outside, but he's shown the ability throughout his career to slide around. And it makes me wonder, and I think this might be the biggest question, is how are the Steelers going to deploy their cornerbacks? Joey Porter Jr. is the least experienced of these three guys, but he's the guy that they're trying to build this cornerback room around. So it makes me wonder if they go to a 3-4 defense and one cornerback has to come off the field. It can't be Ramsey. I think you're paying him too much money. And then you run to the money. They're paying Darius Slay $10 million. So is it Joey Porter or is it Darius Slay that sits on the bench in that situation?
Or could it be that Jalen Ramsey just goes back to free safety in those situations? I think that's interesting. That's something that, that would be putting a lot on his plate early. But, listen, Chris, this guy, almost a 10-year veteran. He's been in the league quite some time now. So if they really believe he could handle something like that, maybe that is on the table. But I do agree with you. It's not hard to figure out who's going to play because all you got to do is follow the money. They're paying Jalen Ramsey a lot of money this year. They're going to use him. Same goes with Darius Slay, although, about half as much money as Ramsey. He's making $10 million a year. Now, Porter's not making that kind of cash yet. So, theoretically, you could sit him down in certain situations, but I agree with you. He's the guy that you want to develop. He's part of the future, and Slay certainly is not. We'll see about Ramsey. Ramsey could play here a few more years after this one if it works out, if it's a good fit for both sides. But I don't want to stunt Joey Porter's growth just because you want to get Slay and Ramsey on the field. So that's certainly something they're going to have to figure out. And it might not be Jalen Ramsey who tells us about that. It could be Mike Tomlin tomorrow. It could be Terrell Austin whenever it is that he meets with us up in training.
I think that's the thing, is that we still have a lot to learn about how this secondary is going to be used. Because like you said, the free safety position, the Steelers haven't added a free safety since they've traded away Minkah Fitzpatrick. So Juan Thornhill presumably takes that spot. But then it is an interesting proposition is, do you move Jalen Ramsey back to free safety when you go to the nickel? Presumably Jalen Ramsey is your nickel when you have three cornerbacks on the field, because Slay is basically an outside corner at this point. Porter's basically an outside corner at this point. Ramsey's a good outside corner, maybe even a great outside corner when he plays at his best. But when you look at the most experience among the three, he's most experienced in the slot compared to the other two. So I think that's where it's going to be interesting to see how they deploy him. And then the idea of moving him to free safety when they shorten up and they say, hey, we're not going to have a nickel in this situation, Jaylen, we want you still in the field, so we're going to put you over here. Man, I'm eager to see where these guys line up, how the Steelers want to use them, and how things develop this season. Much like how I'm interested in the linebackers, and we'll keep getting more into them as well going into the next segment. But this is a defense that I think has a lot more. While there's a lot of starters that are established that we kind of know, like, Cam Hayward's starting. We heard that Derrick Harmon's starting. We know Benton's up in the mix at nose and stuff. But like, it seems like there's a lot of positions on defense where you kind of know who are the key guys, but how the guys around those key guys get deployed is a question that we're gonna have to figure out in training camp.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the pads don't come on until next Tuesday, so we're basically going to have acclimation practices Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. But in those sort of glorified walkthroughs, I think we will get a little sneak peek into what they're thinking. Also, remember, we're going to see a lot of young guys, new guys thrown into the mix. The early portions of training camp, Chris, they want to see how some of these new guys can perform. They're going to throw them in there with the veterans. We saw that last season with Beanie Bishop. Now, a little bit different circumstances. Cam Sutton was out and he wasn't going to be able to play, but they do like throwing some young guys into the fire to see how they respond. So, yes, we're going to get a little sneak peek into what they're doing this week, but I think once the pads come on next week, and then once we get into preseason week 1, that game against the Jaguars, I think that's when we're really going to kind of figure out what ways they're leaning in terms of Ramsey and which positions he goes to.
Absolutely. We're going to keep talking about different position battles, defense and offense, because there's lots of questions coming into training camp as we will be talking to players as they arrive in the morning, and then talking to Mike Tomlin after the Steelers conditioning test. Don't go anywhere. We still got a lot to discuss here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. But first, I want to remind you the show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. They also do workers' compensation. They don't just help you when you're injured in an accident. They help you when you need workers' compensation representation. Because when you were hard on the job, again, that the insurance doctor is the one to decide when your treatment's over, when your benefits are over. They're not on your side. They're on the company's side. So you need someone that is on your side and who's going to come and be able to represent you in a strong way. And that's Edgar Snyder Associates. You can call them today at 1-800-94-EDGAR, because Edgar Snyder Associates has been dealing with workers' compensation rights for years, and they have become really experienced in helping you fight for the rights that you deserve. So call Edgar Snyder Associates today at 1-800-94-EDGAR. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. We're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter here with Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's talk about the linebackers real quick. We talked about the corners. I hinted about the linebackers in the last segment. Patrick Queen's the definite starter, and I'd say that Peyton Wilson may even be the solid number 2 linebacker for this team. But Cole Holcomb, when he was signed some years ago, he was signed to be the leader of the linebacker room at the time, and then he suffered a really bad injury, missed all of last season. But now he's back, and he looked really in shape when we see him working out at minicamp. And then they added Malik Harrison. How do you see this linebacker room working out? Do you think that Queen and Wilson are on the field primarily, and then it's just filling the other guys in? Or do you think the Steelers try to keep a healthy rotation of linebackers?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be one of the more interesting parts of training camp. First off, they're very deep at inside linebacker. I think this is, and Terrell Austin talked about this in the spring at minicamp. It's the deepest this position has been. I think it's the best. He says the best this position has been since he arrived in 2019. So there's a lot of talent there. Now, in terms of divvying up the reps, if everyone stays healthy, it's going to be difficult, Chris, because it's not like the secondary where, you have different sub packages where guys might fit in different situations. I mean, if you have 2-3 down linebackers, those guys theoretically are good for all downs. Now, the one thing with Peyton Wilson is he still might be a little light against the run. So I think there are going to be special packages when the Steelers play the Ravens and some other teams that are run heavy. That's probably where you're going to see Malik Harrison. That might be where you see Cole Holcomb. But I think for the most part, like if you're playing a team that is, a good passing team, I think you're probably going to see Peyton Wilson for the bulk of the reps along with Patrick Queen. So, tough situation for Terrell Austin and Mike Tomlin to divvy up their reps, but I'd much rather be in this situation than what they've been the last couple of years, right? Like trying to pull guys off the street free agents to fill in the holes when they have injuries. This, like I said, this is a very talented and a very deep inside linebacking core.
It is, and I think it's going to give them the versatility at the linebacker position that they really haven't had since Ryan Shazier. And that's not saying that any one player lives up to Shazier and what he was able to do for the defense. But when him and Vince Williams on the field, they could cover so much ground. They worked so well together. They could stuff the run, cover the pass, blitz the quarterback. And I think they have an assortment of linebackers that can do all three of those tasks at pretty good paces. That's going to be a big, interesting point. To your point earlier, it's going to take the pads being on before we kind of get a sense of, okay, this is what they want to do. This is what they're trying to do. Let's see how this plays out in preseason games and their practice against another team, and then leading into the regular season to get a sense of what they're going to try to do moving forward. I think that's definitely a part of the equation there. Let's move to the D-line real quick, because whereas we kind of know Cam Hayward's definitely the starter, he's the captain and everything. Keanu Benton is the starting nose, but we heard that Derrick Harmon is going to be the starting guy from Carl Dunbar. So when we're looking at that position group, it sounds like the top three guys are solidified. But so I think that what's going to be the most interesting thing is how do these other guys fit in behind them? Isaiah Loudermilk is entering his fifth year with the team or something like that. And then they signed Dan Aquale, and then they have other guys like DeMarvin Leal trying to fight their way into some playing time. I think that's going to be really interesting, because as important as it is for your D-line, your starting D lineman to be really good, and that's why they went and got, and Y.A. Black also in this depth battle as well. But when you got Derrick Harmon and those guys, but good rushing offenses will take advantage of when your starters come off the field if you don't have really good guys behind them. And I think that's why that is such an underrated position battle of camp right now.
Yeah, I think, the Steelers were not happy with the defensive line last season. I think you could argue it's well overdue that they addressed it in the draft the way they did this year with Derrick Harmon and Y.A. Black. So I think those guys are going to have a chance to have roles. Now, we know Harmon's going to be a starter. He's going to be out there a lot. If he plays well, that'll bolster that line. I think Y.A. Black is going to have a chance to compete with Isaiah Loudermilk and DeMarvin Leal and Aquale. I mean, why not? I know Leal was injured last year, but it's not like he's been a force. I know he's got some pedigree with him being a third-round pick in 2022, but he's never really produced to his draft slot. Isaiah Loudermilk was brought back on a vet minimum contract. I think there's competition there. He's not a shoo-in for a spot on the 53-man roster. I think they like Logan Lee, but he spent last season on IR. So I think the point is it's a big training camp for a lot of those guys. I just ran off about 4 or 5 names. I think all those guys are going to be competing, and I think obviously the ones who play the best and the ones who show they can first and foremost stop the run are probably going to be the guys who are out there the most.
Stuffing the run is going to be the priority, especially those early downs. They want to make sure that they're forcing more teams into third and long so that they can be more aggressive on those obvious passing downs. And I think that's a big way how that you're going to play into the game. And again, that's why it's the first week of camp is always exciting, because it's the inaugural practice and then you get into it. But by that fourth that fourth, like, first week of practice, you know, you're sitting there and you're like, the fourth practice that first week, you're like, all right, we've seen the dog and pony. We've seen Aaron Rodgers throw the ball around. You're always going to sit there like, all right, just let's take that day off. Let's come back and let's see these guys in pads, because that's going to be the big thing to watch is when the pads go on. And I think a big part of this team is they want to be physical. And we've talked about that physicality on the offensive side of the ball for a while. We will some more on the next segment. But I think you have a big point, especially with the linebackers and the D line. A big part of what they want to see is they want to see these guys come up, show their physicality, show their technique, be able to win at the line of scrimmage more often, so that teams like the Ravens can't just run over them in big moments.
Yeah, absolutely. The way last season ended, and Omar Khan has been on this drumbeat since we talked to him at the Combine. His exact quote was, "It's unacceptable." So he didn't want to repeat of what happened last offseason, and I think you see the way that he approached the draft and free agency this year. He made a lot of changes, and like I said, I think those guys are going to have plenty of opportunities to earn spots in that rotation.
We've talked a lot about the defense. Let's talk about the offense. We'll do that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, what about this show is also brought to you by UFC Gym. Looking for a way to challenge your body and sharpen your mind? Step into something more than just a workout. Welcome to the brand new Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy at UFC Gym Pittsburgh. Here, it's not just about training. It's about living the values of honor, discipline, and respect. Whether you're a total beginner or leveling up on your skills, you'll be guided through a structured program led by a third-degree black belt instructor who builds confidence, strength, flexibility, and real technique. Head down to the UFC Gym at the Waterfront or Market Square to learn about the exclusive 3-month introductory package today. That's only at UFC Gym Pittsburgh. We're also brought to you by Boss Menswear. Boss Menswear has reached icon status for its tailoring, but offers more than just the perfect suit. The collections also feature casual and athleisure pieces, presenting a complete wardrobe for fast-paced modern lifestyles. Tailoring and sportswear are brought together in a look that is ready for whatever the day may hold. Go to Boss today with all their opportunities for men's sportswear and leisure wear, now open at Ross Park Mall with a selection of menswear pieces. That's Boss at Ross Park Mall. We're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, we talk defensive position battles a lot. I think we can all agree there's not much going on at quarterback. I think some people probably wonder, can Will Howard overtake Mason Rudolph? Not going to happen. But let's talk about the realistic ones. I think one big one that we could focus on is Jaylen Warren and Kaleb Johnson. Now, I think that Jaylen Warren is definitely RB1 right now and is going to be the starter by week 1. But Ray, I wouldn't put it past the Steelers to try to work Kaleb Johnson in as the year goes on, and I wouldn't be shocked if we fast forward about 2.5 months and it's week 14, and all of a sudden Kaleb Johnson is getting the majority of the reps here. Do you think there's any chance for Kaleb Johnson to do that this season, or do you think this is Jaylen Warren's job until he's not on the team anymore?
I think you could see that, like maybe, like you said, around Thanksgiving or somewhere around that time. But I think the Steelers are going to make Kaleb Johnson earn those reps and those touches and those snaps. I think what you have to remember about Jaylen Warren, he's flashed when he's had the opportunity to tote the ball more, but he's always been their best pass protector since he arrived. He's always been their best receiving tight end since he's arrived. That's not going to change. So, Chris, in passing situations, he's going to be out there. What we don't know right now is, can the Steelers get Kaleb Johnson up to speed for those types of situations? Do you want Jaylen Warren out there all the time in those situations, or do they get to a point where they're comfortable with Kaleb Johnson in pass pro and then as a receiver out of the backfield as well? But no doubt his bread and butter is going to be on first and second downs. I would fully expect by October, once October gets here, if not before then, I think you'll see the carries pretty similar, but I think you'll see the snaps in favor of Warren just because he's going to be out there so much on second and third and long.
No, I hear you on that, especially with Jaylen Warren's experience in pass protection. It's so valuable to what the Steelers do on offense, and Kaleb Johnson has to work on that. It's not something he was an expert at at Iowa. So I think that's another trick that Jaylen Warren has up his sleeve that's going to help him hold on to this job for a little bit before the Steelers do eventually move on to Kaleb Johnson, because that's obviously the plan when you draft the guy in the 3rd round at the running back position. Let's move to another new addition who we haven't talked to yet, and that's Jonnu Smith. He joins the tight end room with Pat Freiermuth and Darnell Washington. Now, we had been talking about the potential of using Darnell Washington more this year, with the way that he was being lined up. He told us when we talked to him at minicamp, Arthur Smith has had me line up at different spots and run different routes, and he's trusting me more, and this is really great. And then all of a sudden they go and get Jonnu Smith, who just finished a year with the most catches, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns in a season by a Miami Dolphin tight end in their franchise's history. And he's been a productive tight end playmaker. But Ray, how do you see this working out as far as who becomes the priority tight end threat? Because Pat Freiermuth is drafted in the 2nd round to be that guy and is getting paid to be that guy now. Do you think that Jonnu Smith can overtake him in the receiving threat game as far as the Steelers?
I don't think he should, Chris, but I can't roll out that he will. You can make a strong argument that Pat Freiermuth was underutilized last season. I think he put up some decent numbers, but you take a look back at the way they distributed, the targets. I think Pat Freiermuth probably deserved a few more last year. And now you're adding a vet, Jonnu Smith. I mean, that guy produced with 88 catches and over 800 yards last year. He scored 8 touchdowns. So he's very much a viable player, and they're going to have to figure out ways to use him. I just don't think it should be at the expense of Pat Freiermuth. So I think in the end, you're probably looking at a lot of 2 tight formations. When you want to go heavy, you could even go 3 tights. But I think Jonnu Smith and Pat Freiermuth are going to be on the field a lot at the same time. And I think inevitably it's going to take some targets away from Pat. They're just going to have to figure out a way to still keep him heavily involved, because I think he's still your 2nd best receiver. He's your best pass catching tight end. I think he's your 2nd best receiver behind DK Metcalf. You got to find ways to use him, and they haven't done that throughout the course of his career. They got to start doing it.
Right, and that's something that I think Arthur Smith was expected to do more of when he took over after the Matt Canada years. And I think you saw an uptick in production, but still not the uptick that makes him a premier threat, at the tight end position.
It didn't materialize, I don't think, the way we all thought it might with Arthur Smith, right? We all heard Arthur Smith came into the league as a tight ends coach with the Titans, and then he utilized tight ends as when he was OC with the Titans. Like you said, Pat Freiermuth was used a little bit more than he was under Matt Canada, but still not to the point, I think, where you're paying Pat Freiermuth a lot of money to be a quality tight end. They got to start finding better ways to utilize his pass catching skills.
I agree. They got to find better ways to use it, especially in the red zone where he can be such a dangerous threat. And now with Jonnu Smith, you got 2 guys that can be dangerous like that. And Darnell Washington, I still it's kind of crazy, because I was thinking okay, he can be a guy that gets more than 8 catches this year. But now with those 2 guys in, he's probably gonna have a hard time seeing the field this season.
Yeah, I agree with you. We hear at every camp, how's Darnell look? Just have him post up because he's 6'8". Well, I just don't think it's going to be in his future, especially after they go out and get Jonnu Smith. I mean, I think, once in a while they'll use him just as a changeup, but people looking for him to have 35, 40 catches this year, that's not going to happen.
You talked about the 2nd leading receiver on the team, being Pat Freiermuth behind DK Metcalf, at least what we assume is going to happen. But let's talk about the 2nd receiver period. And that's something that could get added to by Omar Khan sometime during training camp. But the Steelers' current situation is DK Metcalf is your 1, Calvin Austin as your 2, Roman Wilson as your 3, and then guys like Scotty Miller, Robert Woods, all scattered through. And who knows, maybe Robert Woods is above Roman Wilson actually in that situation. But do you see a way the Steelers don't have Calvin Austin as their number 2 receiver option, not necessarily the receiving option of being the person they target to, but do you see a way that he either gets overtaken or they trade or sign somebody that kind of forces him, hey, you're going to take a step back behind this guy?
No, I don't. And I know they can go out and get one of those free agents who's still out there. There's a couple guys who are who are still in the mix. But I don't think we talk about it enough, or maybe we do. But I think they really like Calvin Austin, Chris. And I think given his production last year, while modest, 550 yards, 4 touchdowns, it's not like he was setting the world on fire. But if there's just a little bit of an uptick there this year, you get to 650 or 700 yards, maybe you get to 5 touchdowns. All of a sudden, that's not a stretch to say that that's not, a quality number 2 receiver, especially if DK Metcalf is over 1,000 yards and producing touchdowns the way you hope he will, given the money you're paying that guy, right? So the bulk of the targets are going to go to him in the big time situations. You just need guys like Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson and Robert Woods and those guys just to fill in here and there when their number's called. So I think they still might make a move, but like I said, I think the appreciation for Calvin Austin among the fan base is less than it is inside that building. They really like him inside that building.
They do, and they talk all highly about him. Zach Azzani, the Steelers receiver coach, has glowed about Calvin Austin and the way he grew last year and the way he grew this year. So there's a lot of different things going on, whether it's Kaleb Johnson versus Jaylen Warren at running back, receivers, tight ends. I feel like offensive line is less about battles and more just about proving themselves, and that's still, I think, the most important part of the team that needs to figure itself out this season. But there's plenty of new faces on this team, young and old, and I think that's going to be make things really interesting moving forward, is how the Steelers continue to address their needs. Do they make more aggressive plays, or they kind of let these guys develop now that they're at Saint Vincent, and then kind of just pick and choose as injuries pile up or other things happen?
Yeah, one thing's for sure, Chris. There will not be a shortage of storylines for us to write about or talk about up at training camp. I mean, this is going to be a news-filled training camp with where these guys land, what their roles are going to be. Like you said, not a ton of position battles per se among the players, but there's a lot of questions about how all the pieces to the puzzle are going to fit this year.
Absolutely. He's Ray Fittipaldo. I'm Chris Carter. This has been the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Thanks for tuning in. Remember, this show comes on every Monday, Wednesday, Friday on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of those Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Stay tuned, because we will have reactions all throughout training camp on this channel. If you want quick reactions and our insights of what we're seeing, subscribe to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and follow us on YouTube here to get all of that information. Back here tomorrow after we get our first look at the Steelers arriving at training camp. We'll see you there. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.